Welcome everyone. Welcome to the University of York Festival of Ideas for 2021. My name's Sue Mendes. I'm retired Professor of Politics here at the University of York, and I'm a very enthusiastic and extremely slow cyclist. And it's my huge pleasure to introduce the event this evening, Revolutions, How Women Changed the World on Two Wheels. This event is in collaboration with Cycle Heaven. For those of you who live in York, that's Cycle Heaven down at Hospital Fields Road and at the railway station. They're purveyors of bicycles to me and to many other people in York. So our thanks to them. I have a few housekeeping matters to raise. So I'll deal with those as quickly as I can, and then we can move on to Hannah. If you're watching this live, you can ask questions, that is to say, type questions in the question and answer logo, as it were. At the bottom of your screen down there somewhere, you'll see Q&A. And if you go there, you will be able to ask questions throughout the event. And I'll do my best when we come, as we go along and when we come to the end, I'll do my best to feed as many of those questions as possible to Hannah and ask her to give us her answers. Secondly, if you have any technical issues, if you lose your Wi-Fi, for instance, just rejoin with the link that you used originally to get in here. And please remember that today's event is being recorded, so you will be able to watch it again, though not immediately. It'll take a day or two, I think, before it goes up onto the website. Finally, there are subtitles on the event, again at the bottom of your screen. You'll probably at the bottom, you'll see a little CC, which is live captioning. So if you click on that, it will either give you the live captions if you haven't got them, or take them away if you have got them and you don't want them. So that's the housekeeping, that's the technical bit done, to my great relief. And it's now my pleasure, my really great pleasure, to introduce and welcome Hannah Ross. Hannah is the author of this book. I'm going to put it up here, Revolutions, How Women Changed the World on Two Wheels. It's a terrific read. It's very informative and it's extremely funny in places too. So I'm really pleased that she's agreed to join us here. Hannah works for an independent publisher in London, and when she's not working, she's riding her bike. And it says here, she belongs to a local cycling club, and whenever she can, she packs up her saddlebags and heads for the open road. And she doesn't feel she's really traveled anywhere unless it's on two wheels. It also says, and I may ask her about this later, she spends too long thinking about the next bicycle that she really needs. So as somebody who's really needed a lot of bicycles, I don't really need them as much as I used to, but I really needed them for years and years. I may well find out what the conditions are for really needing the next new bike. In the meantime, thank you again, Hannah, for joining us this evening and for coming into conversation with me and the people of York and everybody on the Zoom. At the beginning of your book, there's a big claim, which is made by Susan B. Anthony, the American feminist and suffrage fighter. And she says, you quote her as saying, that the bicycle has done more to emancipate women than anything else in the world. That's a huge claim. And I'd like to perhaps pursue that with you as we talk. But before that, can you just tell us when you started cycling and what, as it were, made you a cyclist?
I started when I was very little. I started with the pedaling around on a little three-wheeled trike, and then progressed to a little tiny bike. I think that one of my brothers had procured with stabilizers, and then progressed to stabilizers being taken off. And I really remember that, even though I must have been 4, I'm not sure, 5. And that sort of terrifying moment when, you know, the person helping you lets you go and says it's fine, you'll get, you know, you won't fall off. And don't think I did, but obviously at some points I did, because that's what you do when you're a child. You ride your bike and do dangerous things and fall off. And yeah, as a child I used to, you know, like many people who learn to ride bikes, just pedal around the neighborhood with my friends. And we used to go, you know, as we got older, a bit further, to sometimes got told off for going too far on our bikes. But then, like a lot of people, I stopped when I was sort of 14, 15, and didn't pick it up again until I was in my mid-20s. I'd moved from, I grew up in Bristol, and I went to university, and then moved to London, and started getting back into cycling as a way to spend some time out of London. Actually, weirdly, at first it wasn't about commuting, it was going out to the countryside and spending the day cycling around lovely places. And then I started doing it more and more. I cycled to work every day. I started going on bike touring holidays, and soon sort of, yeah, everything was about spending more and more time cycling. So yeah, that's kind of and how, what was your other question? It was about how I define myself as a cyclist.
Yeah,
Or
how do you, I suppose it's the same question in a way, is that, you know, the beginning of your story is a familiar one. You get a little tricycle, you pedal along.
Yeah.
Then you maybe for whatever reason you stop doing this when you're 15, 16 and pick it up again. But to be straightforward, not everybody then writes a book about cycling. Not everybody then has the kind of enthusiasm and the vigor for the bicycle that you have. So I suppose, what turned you into a junkie is my question, really.
Gosh, I don't know what it was that made me like it so much. That I spent so much of my life now doing it, and then wanting to write about it. It's just really good fun. To have the luxury of spending a lot of time on a bicycle and then writing about bikes. I guess that makes me quite a cycle nerd, but also quite lucky. And when I was writing the book, I was lucky enough to take a sabbatical from my work and live in France for 8 months, which is one of the greatest places for cycling. Well, when you're living in the countryside in the Pyrenees, you can cycle every day in incredible scenery. So there's sort of nothing. Well, there are. I mean, you know, it's personal, but to me, there's almost nothing better than cycling up an amazing mountain road in the middle of stunning French scenery. It's just really like it.
There's the story of the fun of it, and there's also the story of the, I mean, in my case, just the sheer practicality of it. You know, if you live in York, and particularly if you're lucky enough to live here, you know, why would you do anything else? But in the book here, let's go back to this big claim. She says, more than anything, the bicycle has done more to emancipate women than anything else in the world. And a good bit of the book is taken up with sort of fleshing out that thought. So it's not entirely about fun. It's not entirely about practicality. It's also about politics, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely.
It's about freedom. Absolutely. So can you just talk us through that?
Well, the Susan B. Anthony quote's interesting because she never actually rode a bicycle.
Oh, really?
She was. She said this in, I can't remember the exact year, but it's sort of around, I think, 1894. And this is the point where the bicycle had been, as we know it today, what was then called the safety bicycle, had been around for about 10 years by this point. And sort of the mid 1890s was the absolute peak of cycling mania, as it was seen then. I mean, it's never ever been more popular as it was then. It really took over the world.
With
in certain
women
parts
as,
of the world.
sorry to interrupt you, but women as well as men?
Yes,
Huge,
yes,
huge
yeah,
popularity with women.
yeah. So in North America and in the UK, around a third of cyclists by about 1896 were women, which is quite significant.
It's huge.
And going back to the Susan B. Anthony's quote about the bicycle emancipating women, what she's sort of referring to is the fact that at this time, freedom for women was in short supply, politically, economically, socially. Most women at this time, they didn't have, you know, certainly in Britain and North America and many other countries, they did not have the right to vote. They were disenfranchised. They didn't have control over money. They had very little control and autonomy over their lives, even to the extent of what they could wear. And anyone who's ridden a bicycle will say what they really like about it is that it feels freeing. And that's exactly, I think, what Susan B. Anthony was kind of getting at. But also on a sort of really fundamental level, the bicycle is about taking you somewhere you want to go on under your own power, on your own steam, relatively easily. And women at this time wouldn't have gone around. They wouldn't have got around very many places. This was before the car. This was before kind of much transport. And again, sort of going back to the fact that women just generally led lives that didn't involve having much control over their lives and where they went. Some women did, but many didn't. So this idea of this incredible machine appearing, which embodied this idea of taking you somewhere yourself. I mean, it's you know, it is political, but it's also fun. And this is, so when we talk about bicycles, it's quite complicated to talk about because it does embody very many things. There's the as Sue said, there's the transport aspect, taking you from A to B, and it's practical, but there's also fun. So it's recreational as well, and then there's the sporting side as well, and all these things are different, sometimes interlinked. But when we talk about bicycles, it's not just, or cycling, it's not just one type of cycling or one type of cyclist.
But it's in the 19th century. It's you show in the book. It's also subversive, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah.
Women are gaining their freedom,
Yeah.
or seizing their freedom,
Yeah.
perhaps. But it's at a price.
Yes,
and I
certainly at the beginning, it certainly was. When I talk about a third of cyclists being women, that wasn't immediate. It was gradual. Whereas men had been riding bikes or machines that were related to bicycles. So, for instance, penny farthing and their predecessors for decades before this. But these are the type of you know, penny farthing wasn't really suitable for women to ride because women at this time wore long skirts. You couldn't really jump up on a great big huge penny farthing very easily with long Victorian skirts and petticoats. So the safety bicycles, as it was called, democratized cycling for everyone, actually. Generally, it started off very expensive, it then got cheaper and cheaper, so people who couldn't afford it when it was first introduced could afford it probably a decade later. But for women, it became something that was much easier for them to use, and then manufacturers realized that there was a big market if they could sell bicycles to women, so they started marketing them quite heavily towards women because, you know, it could be half their market. They started making bicycles which were, you know, ladies' bicycles, so you could step onto them easily with your long Victorian skirt. It wouldn't necessarily mean that your skirt wouldn't get caught up in the wheels at some point, although they did all have chain guards and other kind of safety measures. But yes, the cycling industry was wanted women to cycle because they could sell them bicycles. But the first women to cycle before it became a sort of mass pursuit, they did go through a difficult time. I talk in the book about some women who reported having stones thrown at them when they cycled down the street, having insults hurled at them. There were local doctors who put out all sorts of obviously wrong information about what might happen to women who bicycle, because also it's you have to consider at this time women just didn't do sport. It wasn't really a thing. So it was unusual to see women doing something physical. Rich women rode horses, but generally there wasn't much other sport. There was swimming, but that tended to be quite sort of controlled and segregated. But this was kind of one of the first mass recreational sports that women took part in, and seeing women using their bodies and sitting on bicycle seats was quite shocking to many men, I should say, at this time. And there was certain resistance in certain parts about women doing this.
You in the book here, you quote from the Lady Cyclist magazine of 1895. One woman writing to Lady Cyclist magazine likened the lives of women who partook in the fashions of the day to one long suicide, with corsets responsible for fainting, hysteria, on and on it goes. And in her view, you say, cycling was pivotal in promoting the cause of dress reform. We've a picture of Lady Harberton. Here she is. And she was a very powerful figure in women's dress, wasn't she? And in the cycling movement in the 19th century. So I just love the look of her there. And I noticed that she's not riding, as it were, a lady, what we'd call a lady's bike.
She's not. It looks enormous, actually.
Yeah, it's up to her. Yeah, I couldn't get on it.
Yeah. She is wearing what was referred to at that time as rational dress. So Lady Harberton, or Viscountess Harberton, she was actually, her name was Florence Pomeroy, but she was known as Lady Harberton. That was the title. And she was the editor of the Rational Dress Gazette, which was a publication that had been around for actually a really long time. And the wife of Oscar Wilde was also involved in this as well. And it was all about campaigning for women to stop wearing ridiculous Victorian fashions. There was so much, it's really hard to understand now why this would be such a big thing, why you would set up a publication to campaign for women to not wear skirts, because women always wore skirts. It was just women, that was how women dressed, how they were expected to dress, and any deviation from that was seen as, we use the word subversive, Sue. It was really shocking and controversial. So if you wanted to wear any garment that resembled trousers or masculine dress, as it would have been seen, you were really sort of rocking the sort of Victorian boat here. And so Lady Harberton was a keen cyclist, but she was also a keen reformer. She wanted women to be able to choose to wear what they wanted, and in her view, the sensible thing for women to be wearing, and this is completely understandable, was an outfit where women could weren't wearing copious amounts of skirts and petticoats, all things that she felt were dangerous. They were incredibly heavy. They were restrictive. You mentioned in that comment too about the corset, incredibly restrictive, incredibly, they could really make people ill. This is what women were just expected to wear, and they were all clothes designed basically to keep women from not going very far, or not certainly not moving very fast, and not moving very far, which is kind of the opposite of what a bicycle is. That is designed to take you lightly, far and easily. So it's understandable that Lady Harberton got quite into bicycles, because she liked freedom and she liked the idea that women could be independent, and on her bicycle she would wear rational dress, and there were a number of women. I mean, this style did take off. So it's these, what she's wearing is these sorts of baggy trousers or knickerbockers just below the knee, and long socks and a jacket. And you can imagine if you're cycling and it's distance, which Lady Harberton did. She liked doing long cycle rides. You can understand that you would much prefer to wear an outfit like this than a great big long skirt, petticoat and corset. But Florence and Lady Harberton ended up going to court over her rational dress, when she turned up at a hotel in Surrey. I think it was 1897, and she wanted to stop for a coffee. She'd been cycling all day, and she was thirsty. And when she went into the hotel, the landlady said she couldn't sit in the coffee room. She would have to sit in the bar. And Lady Harberton was quite horrified by this, and refused to sit in the bar. She wanted to sit in the coffee lounge, but yeah, they refused her. And this was because of her outfit, the fact she wasn't wearing a skirt, she was wearing rational dress, she was wearing knickerbockers. The landlady was horrified and wasn't going to have anyone wearing this kind of outfit in her coffee lounge. And Lady Harberton decided to take them to court, on the basis that she had been refused service. And unfortunately the hotel won, because they argued that they had offered her to serve her, but just in the bar, and that was enough to convince the court that they had offered her the service that they were intending to provide. But even though Lady Harberton lost, she, what she really wanted to do was just draw attention to the fact that this was her cause, this was her passion. It was women having the freedom to wear what they want and wear it where they want as well, and serve coffee when they want. So she didn't manage to change the hotel's mind, and as I said, she didn't win the case, but she drew a lot of attention to the fact that there was so much controversy still around what women wanted to wear and what they could and couldn't wear according to kind of society sort of views on women's dress. And it's worth mentioning at this time, I like to use it as a comparison, but women wearing trousers in France was actually illegal until around this time when the bicycle became popular, and they actually amended the law to say that women could wear trousers if they were in possession of the reins of a horse or the handlebars of a bicycle. So it's interesting that in France, they actually had to make it legal. And actually women there did where there were a lot of women. If you went to the fashionable Bois de Boulogne in Paris, where lots of fashionable Parisians went to cycle, there were lots of women in knickerbockers, and it seemed, certainly in Paris anyway, slightly less controversial than perhaps it did in London. But yes, there was lots of the what women should and shouldn't wear was something that raged on and on for well, really till World War One, when women started wearing trousers after that, really. But it was a long fight.
It seems to me that there's a sort of tendency to which I give in sometimes, to just think how charming this is and strange and odd, and but you point out in the book, and I feel, as a resident of York, I feel slightly ashamed here, that one of the people at whom one of the places where stones were thrown at women for riding bikes was York. And this is the throwing of stones now. This isn't just a strange, quirky habit by odd ladies. This is the throwing of stones. And also the threat of, and you catalogue it here in really alarming detail, the threat of all sorts of physical disability, which could be associated with riding bicycles. Terrible things would happen to you,
Yeah.
including, and I would like advice on this, including bicycle face. You say that the head when it came to the perils of cycling for women, the head aroused as much debate as the reproductive organs. Before the watershed, so perhaps we won't go there. Concern focused on bicycle face. So I have to ask now, what is bicycle face, and have I got it? After all these, after 50 years of daily cycling, have I? Seriously, I mean, these threats of bicycle face, of infertility, of this is not a joke, is it? I mean, this is serious.
No, yeah, people genuinely thought this, or at least they wanted people to believe this idea because it might stop them cycling, and that was the goal, really, to put out enough fear about what might happen to you if you rode a bicycle. So yeah, whether these doctors or whoever else actually believed that bicycle face was possible, I think some of them probably did, but essentially bicycle face was seen as it's almost like when people say to children, don't pull that face because if the wind changes you'll stay like that. That's probably the easiest way, the most comparable way of explaining it, and showing how ludicrous it was. But this idea that if you physically exerted yourself, and as I said before, people weren't used to women doing physical activity, unless you was an actual working class woman who actually had to do manual labor, but generally physical exertion, certainly for middle class and upper class women, was just not really a thing, and it wasn't encouraged. Women weren't encouraged to break a sweat, and so this idea that when you rode a bicycle you'd be straining and exerting yourself, and you'd pull a face in doing so, and that face would then, you do it so often that actually your face would then become set like that.
Yeah.
And when this was a time when, well, it's not, I suppose, that different, but women's physical appearance, their femininity was kind of prized above all else, their feminine charm, and it was seen that if a woman was straining pedaling a bicycle, all of that could be lost, and undone. Essentially what they were saying is she would become masculine again. It's the same as clothing. She would lose her femininity. She'd lose her, she was going to lose her skirts, wear rational dress. She was also going to lose the feminine features of her face, which is all nonsense. But actually, it's worth pointing out that bicycle face was something that they also thought that men could get as well. Obsessive male cyclists could also apparently suffer from this. But then there were lots of you referred to them briefly, Sue, but there were lots of conditions that were female specific related to riding a bike, such as
I just try to ask some of the, because there are quite a number of questions coming in here. And so can I ask on behalf of the audience who are clearly as gripped by this as I am, what was the, well, one point that's been made, which I think is interesting and important, and it's in the book, and one of our participants has raised it, is the things that you describe about the impediments to women in the 19th century still arise, still occur in other parts of the world today. And you mentioned this, that our audience member refers to the Middle East and to Saudi Arabia. So and you do mention that in the book. So could I ask you to say something about that?
Yeah, yes, it is very comparable, and it's interesting that the language and the conversation around it, when I looked into this, is very reminiscent of what was happening then. So for the book, I spoke to women in Saudi Arabia, also in Afghanistan, who have women who have ridden bicycles in the face of huge opposition, and often very, very dangerous opposition as well. So, for instance, the women that I spoke to in Afghanistan, they were threatened with being stoned if they carried on riding their bicycles. I mean, stoning is different from having stones thrown at you. I mean, it's really horrifying. But so if we talk about Saudi Arabia, the thing that's really interesting about that is that it was actually illegal for women to ride bicycles until I think it was 2013. There's a really beautiful film about this, about a young girl who's desperate to ride a bicycle and have a bicycle, which is completely, absolutely no. And she does eventually get it. The green bicycle is really, I really recommend it. And that was made before it was made legal for women to ride bikes. So women are legally allowed to ride bikes in Saudi Arabia, and the law changed before the driving ban. But what's really interesting about the wording around it is that apparently it says that you're allowed to ride a bicycle if you're a woman, but you're not allowed to use it to go anywhere, as in a sort of A to B. You can ride around your local park, or
so you just ride in small circles.
Yeah, you can ride it. So yeah, under kind of under sort of in certain spaces, under certain circumstances. So one of the women that I spoke to, she is Saudi Arabian, but she also spends a lot of time in Europe. So she'd done a lot of cycling here, and she became interested in this. I can't remember what it's called. It's a big charity race where they cycle. It's quite a long distance, and you have teams from different countries. And she had entered as the one Saudi woman. She didn't know any other women at that time who cycled in Saudi Arabia. And she tried to join a group of men that she knew from Saudi Arabia, but they wouldn't let her join them. They said it's just too controversial. Sorry, even though we're in Europe, you just can't. So she did it and joined, I think, a group of women from all over, and it created quite a lot of publicity back in Saudi Arabia, and she was inundated with women contacting her saying, I'd love to ride a bike. So she started a group in her home city, and they would go out, well, I think they still do, and helping each other learn to ride and supporting each other. But when she was riding alone, she would often be stopped by sort of authorities and religious police there. They had no real grounds to stop her, but they would try and stop her or question her right to ride her bicycle. So it's
that's bizarre, because that's going back to the beginning, to the thought that what really is exciting about biking is that it gave women freedom. It gives you independence.
They don't want that in Saudi Arabia.
Exactly, and this round and round in circles is really undermining the very thing that women found from earliest days found most attractive, that you're now independent and you can up and go.
Yeah.
But you prompt me to ask about, we talked quite a lot about the extent to which women's cycling is thought to be dangerous, subversive, unnatural, doomed to it's a sort of suicide attempt if you do it in the wrong clothes, all of that. But in the book and in what you've just said about Saudi Arabia, you also catalogue something which I think is very important now and becoming more important, and that is the kind of companionship that women can get from cycling with other women. The story you told just now is interesting, but in the book you also talk about Black Girls Do Bike and about is it the Psycho Sisters?
Yes, in LA.
Yeah. So tell us about them.
Yeah, they're a very political group. They're Latino women in LA, in East LA. They used to organise, they still do, something called Lunar Eyes, which are night rides. They're kind of reclaim the streets. It comes from that kind of idea. Reclaim the streets for women to cycle, because lots of women in their community didn't feel that was available to them. They didn't see other women like them who were doing it. So it was kind of making it accessible. It's also LA, which is a really difficult city to cycle in. It's quite car centric, should we say. But also, as I said, it was also about male violence. There's a messaging about male violence against women and this kind of safety in their group, and taking back the streets. They're particularly focused on anti-gentrification at the nowadays, actually. So I think they still do the Lunar Rides, but it's become less a focus, I think. But this goes, I mean, there are, like you say, Sue, there are lots of amazing groups for women cycling with other women, and it goes all the way back to I talk in the book about the Lady Cyclists Association, which is something set up in the 1890s, which was all sort of like a almost like a women's sort of pre-internet dating, well, not dating, not romantically, I don't think, for most people, but putting women in touch with other women who wanted to go cycling, because they might not necessarily have known any other women who wanted to go cycling. So it's really lovely to see the kind of this, how it's gone from all the way back then and still going on today, kind of putting women in touch with other women who, women who felt that, they don't have the confidence to do it on their own, or they want the companionship. They want to go on they wanted to go on a cycling holiday, but didn't know anyone else they could go with. So yeah, it's a really wonderful tradition that's carried on.
Well, I suppose I will put, I don't myself belong or ride with the group, but there is a terrific group in York called the Bike Bells, and they do, I believe, I say I don't, I've not ridden with them myself, but I think it's hugely admirable to try to give people, particularly women, confidence to go and do this, because it's, if you describe your own, as it were, cycling history, as you're having started with the tricycle and the stabilizer and so on, and then you just carry on doing it. But many people, many women don't cycle as children, and then it's, if you're going to start to do this when you're 40, 50,
really hard. It's
hard.
Terrifying as well.
Yeah.
And it's not like signing up to swimming lessons at a local pool. It's difficult to find out where you don't, most people wouldn't just go out and buy a bicycle if they've never ridden one, because they want to try it out, they want to learn how to ride first, they want to but more and more, there are more and more organizations that are able to offer this, and again, this goes back to back when the bicycle was new. This would have been the problem for people then, because they would have been adults. In fact, children weren't encouraged to cycle back then. I'm not even sure when they first started making children's bikes, but you would have had all these adults who'd never, well, hardly done any sort of physical activity before, but certainly never ridden a bicycle. And it would have been terrifying. And what happened was cycling schools became this big fashionable thing, and they were sort of set up in cities around the world, which is kind of bizarre to imagine. They were sort of like riding schools, but for bicycles, and they would keep a kind of fleet of bicycles that people could learn to ride on, and they had instructors telling them what to do. There were even, I talk about how in New York, women would cycle around to music and do kind of like routines. It was just, cycling was everywhere. And it was fashionable to go and sit in the cycle school bar and watch your friends on the riding bicycles in front of you. It's really interesting.
Henry, I'm on the question and answer here, and in order to protect my own safety, I have to say that I'm getting messages which tell me that the York Bike Bells will provide cake as well as confidence.
Oh yeah,
so
crucially important.
This is a matter of priorities now. But more seriously, I think these things are where people are. There are groups of people who help. Are hugely popular and rightly so.
Yeah.
Prompts me to ask if you can tell us something about the work that you've done with the refugee and asylum seekers, because it's a variation on that same theme, isn't it? Women who maybe don't feel very confident for a variety of reasons, who feel strange and awkward and uncertain, and this is a way of integrating them and also giving them the freedom that everybody wants.
Yeah. I volunteered for a time, until the pre-pandemic, an organisation which supports refugees and asylum seeker women to learn to ride bicycles. And at the end of their training, I suppose you'd call it, when they graduate, and when they're cyclists, they get to take a bike away. And it's a really incredible and inspiring project. It's part of a wider charity which is about giving refugees and asylum seekers bicycles, which is, when you're living off very little money, a bicycle is an incredibly valuable tool to be able to access things around your city for free. But also, a lot of the women in the group that I was helping with, they would say all the things that, like, they love it. It gives me a sense of freedom. I feel like I'm flying. All sort of really lovely, positive things. When often living in that situation, your life isn't very free. You're dependent on your asylum status, your refugee status, your financial situation. It's all very difficult. But to have this time where you're having a pleasurable experience on a bicycle, but also being able to use it to get around the city more freely and easily, it really kind of opens up your environment. It's a really, I can't say that I contributed a huge amount. I helped, but it's amazing kind of cycle trainers who professionally train to kind of help adults learn to ride bicycles. And as you say, these were women that hadn't had the opportunity to learn in their home countries, whether that was because women riding bikes wasn't generally a thing that their communities did, or they just didn't have access to bicycles. Bicycles were expensive and just not available. It's a new thing, and that thing of learning to ride as an adult, it is a slightly scary but exciting process. But it's different to learning to ride as a child. Your fear is definitely greater. Fear of falling.
Some of these schemes also teach people to repair the bike and to maintain the bike, which I think is also really, really important, because that gives you yet more freedom, yet more control over your own destiny, so to speak.
If you're having to pay every time you get a puncture, it can get quite expensive.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, I want to quote a statistic at you, which you give at the end of. I'm conscious that we haven't got a huge amount of time, but I want to ask you about this. At the very end of the book, you say, and it's gobsmacking, really. You say, at present, 60% of journeys between 1 and 2 miles in the UK are done by car. And that's just shocking as a statistic. And my question is, and we're really, really lucky in York. I know somebody's pointed out to me in the chat earlier on that there are potholes around here, it must be said. There are an awful lot of potholes. But, let's not open up that wound. There is a lot of cycling in York. And as a cyclist, I certainly feel, I'm not on my own out there. If I feel empowered to take my place on the road, even as a, what should we say, as a mature lady, I feel that. So we're lucky here. But I suppose my question is, if you could just do one thing to translate those car journeys into cycle rides, what would it be?
Infrastructure.
Yeah. Okay.
Cycle lanes, protected cycle lanes, not just lines on the road either, but actual safe cycling infrastructure. That's how it works in the Netherlands. It's how it works in Denmark. It's why so many more journeys there are done by bicycle, and why the gender split is equal. There's not this big disparity between the number of women and the number of men cycling. It's not a consideration, because cycling is as easy as walking. It's easier. You just jump on your bike and go where you want to go, and that's the fastest, quickest, easiest, most pleasant way to do it. We need cycle lanes.
And I suppose then that's the answer to my next question as well, which is, what's the one thing that you do to encourage more, as it were, mature women to ride a bike? I mean, that would, but let me make it harder for you. While we don't have the infrastructure, what would you say now to women, of my age who haven't ridden? And I don't at all underestimate the terror that would be associated for women who, or men as well, come to that, who haven't cycled as a regular thing day after day. It's absolutely blood curdling out there sometimes if you're not used to it.
Yeah. So well, that is tricky. I think one thing is electric bikes, I think, will make a big difference to this the demographic you're talking about. And I know that the government, I don't know if they've done it, or they're talking about making in certain schemes to make buying e-bikes much cheaper for people, which I think I mean the e-bike is really could really revolutionise how people get around in this country. I like to think it is that, and spending money on infrastructure, but also the health benefits. I would emphasise above the health benefits the how enjoyable it is, how pleasurable it is, how much nicer it is to be riding through the streets on a bicycle than sitting in a traffic jam in a car. But it's really good for you. And I cite in the book, and I can't remember them to hand, but various statistics about why cycling is so healthy, why it's good for your brain, it's good for your body, it will make you live longer, hopefully. It has incredible anti-aging properties, and that to the extent where actually doctors are now prescribing cycling to people. It's really it really can change a lot of people's lives, and going back even to the 1890s, that's what a lot of women said. They said, I felt ill for years, and then I started cycling, and I don't have any of those complaints anymore, because they were using their bodies how they should be using them. They weren't just sort of being, sitting around all day, which is how women were expected to be doing nothing, idle. Where it's it's it feels good, and the benefits are multiple.
It's bizarre. It is bizarre. I mean, before I retired to live off the state, as it were, I taught politics, and I used to teach Charlotte, a book you refer to here, The Yellow Wallpaper, Charlotte Perkins Gilman. And of course, what's prescribed for the poorly woman is that she stay in bed, she rest, she relax,
Yeah.
and this is all false. I mean, what she should do is get on her bike and have a good long ride.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to be, dressed in lycra and, have pretensions to doing the Tour de France. You can just poodle around and get from A to B, and that's really good as well. There are many different ways of cycling and many different ways of getting great things out of it.
I should get this in here, and I'll let you go quite soon. But several people have said, and I didn't know this, but doubtless you do, there are breeze groups which are run by volunteers to encourage cycling, and to mentor beginners. And I confess I didn't know about that, but I guess you do.
Yeah, I've never been to one, but what they do, I think, is particularly good because there's sort of a gap between if you know how to cycle and like it, and want to do a bit more, and there's also cycling clubs, and there's a big gap between those two things. And a cycling club is very serious, it tends to be very serious, and they're big rides, and you have to ride at a certain speed. But what Breeze does is just people, it's groups of women going out together and just having a nice time riding at the speed they want to, and the distance that they want to. And it's just about making cycling more accessible, and less overtly sporty and off-putting.
It's not all about being 25 and having lycra.
No,
I mean, that's the crucial thing, I think.
Yeah, and cycling clubs, great. I belong to one, but it's just, there are different ways to enjoy cycling, and that is not for everyone. And it can be off-putting to people to feel that, I have to be as said, dress and lycra and have a very expensive bike and ride very fast. No, you don't.
but I haven't had time to ask you about lots of things that I was going to ask you about. It's been a huge pleasure, but I'm going to ask you one more question before you go. What is you spend a lot of your time thinking about the bike you really need. So lastly, Hannah, what is the bike you really need now?
Well, see, that's the problem. I haven't worked it out. But what I would really, I have my eye on, is I have a weakness for steel bicycles. So quite more old-fashioned steel bicycles. But I would like, ideally, is one to be made for me specifically, which is the ultimate indulgence. And yes, I've been thinking about this for a long time. So at some point, I would like to make that reality if I can financially afford it. But also, the other bike I really need at the moment, so I mentioned this to you earlier, is a cargo bike, so that I can transport my daughter around, and all sorts of other things.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a good dream.
Yeah.
You mentioned the e-bike out there. I have an e-bike, and because I have two new hips, and it's transformed my life. It's just
so lovely to hear.
What I now do, let me finish. I go. There's only one hill in York, and I go up it, past all the young students in lycra, and I quietly switch it into turbo, and I sail past them and I wave, and they don't like it. They don't like it, those young men in lycra, but it's the mature woman's revenge. I think what the book has shown me is that cycling really is just power for ordinary women. It's, of course, there are the elite cyclists, but it's power and freedom and independence for ordinary little old ladies who can now basically just whiz up the hill and have a great time.
What a lovely image to end on.
So I say thank you hugely, huge thanks for a terrific book and for
thank you.
a fantastic in conversation. It's been just such a treat. I could go on and on.
Well, I could too. It's been a real absolute joy to talk to you, Sue. Thanks for reading my book so carefully.
I need now to just make I thank you warmly, and I need now just to give the technical story. Oh, to tell people that the recording of this event will be available on the festival YouTube channel, which you can get from Watch Again. And if you'd like to purchase a copy of Hannah's book, it is a great read. Revolutions: How Women Changed the World on Two Wheels. It's available from our partner bookseller, Fox Lane Books, everybody knows about them, but there they are on the festival page as well. So we really hope that everybody will continue to join in events and to enjoy the rest of the festival and to enjoy the summer and get on your bike. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye, Hannah. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.